Welcome, everyone. The agenda for today's webinar is on your screen. We're going to begin part one in just a moment, serving diverse families in Minnesota with our keynote presenter, Dixie Jordan. That will be followed at 2:10 approximately with our multicultural panel, Practical Tips for Successful Interactions. And then beginning right around 2:35 will be our optional Q&A session. Because your phone lines are muted, you're not able to call in questions. Instead, there's a Q&A, question and answer format to the webinar. On the upper right-hand side of your screen, you should see something that looks kind of like this. There is a double arrow at the very top left of that screen that opens and closes, reduces that screen. If it gets in your way during the webinar, if you click on the double arrows, it will reduce. If you don't see the whole screen, click on the double arrows and you'll have this portion. So anytime at all during the webinar, you can type your question into the box and send that to us. We are going to hold the questions until the question and answer portion near the end of the presentation today. It's really helpful to us if you indicate if you have a particular person you'd like to direct the question to, and also if you would let us know what your role is in working with children and families. And we'll try to address as many questions as time allows, but with a large audience, we may not get to answer every question. And I'd like to just take a minute to introduce myself. My name is Barb Zimke, and I'm moderating today's webinar. I help coordinate the Parent Outreach Project that's sponsoring the webinar. We are so pleased you've joined us, and approximately 150 other participants who work with young children and their families in Minnesota in a wide variety of ways, including early childhood special education, early childhood family education teachers, county social workers, school nurses, medical personnel, Head Start and daycare providers, preschool teachers, paraprofessionals, program directors, child care referral staff, speech, occupational, physical therapists, religious education teachers. The list goes on and on. It's such a fun, diverse audience. And so in cubicles and offices and classrooms and homes across the state, there are participants right now. We have people from St. Cloud, Eagle Lake, Glencoe, Rochester, Pine City, the whole greater Twin Cities metro area, Duluth, Moorhead, Cosmos, just to name a few, and even some from outside the state. The webinar format that makes this travel-free option possible is still somewhat new to us, and it may be new to you as well. So we really appreciate your patience and flexibility with the process. And just remember to call PACER if you're experiencing any difficulties right now. Today's audience is also very diverse in terms of your level of knowledge and experience on this topic. But we find that even the most informed of us usually have some holes in our knowledge. While not all of the information will be new to you today, it's our hope that you will each take away at least one new insight or idea that you can put into use in the coming weeks. The topic of diversity is really challenging to address. There's always the risk of being misinterpreted or sounding stereotypical. Dr. Asara Barara writes in Honoring Differences, "The purpose of recognizing culture and cultural dynamics is not to predict or anticipate. It is rather to become open and respectful to diverse behaviors, even when these are outside our areas of familiarity." Today's webinar is being made possible with funding through a grant from the Minnesota Department of Education's Federal State Personnel Development Grant. This training is a part of a larger parent outreach project. Additional resources, including translated parent-friendly outreach materials and other training materials for professionals, are available on our website and also in the resources that we sent to you. What I'd like to do now is take a moment to have each of the multicultural advocates who will be presenting later in today's webinar to introduce themselves to you.
Good afternoon. My name is Hassan Samantar, and I'm a multicultural parent advocate and trainer here at PACER, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Bonnie Jean Smith, and I'm a multicultural advocate, parent, trainer here at PACER Center.
Buenos días. My name is Jesus Villaseñor. I'm originally from Mexico, and I'm a parent center. I'm a parent advocate here at Pacer Center.
Yao Song, good afternoon. My name is Dao Song. I'm a multicultural advocate here, and I work with South Asian families.
Today's webinar audience, as I mentioned before, includes a wide variety of individuals who work in lots of different fields, but all with one thing in common. You're concerned with the well-being of infants and young children, and you do your work with the goal of producing positive outcomes for children and their families. As an early intervention or early childhood special education professional, you work with families whose children have already been identified as having developmental challenges. The initial stages of entering the service delivery system are challenging for all parents, especially so for those from diverse cultures. Today's presentation will provide you with information and strategies to help you work more effectively with families to reach the outcomes that are important to them. And then as an early care or education provider, you may suspect developmental differences are present in the children you work with, or perhaps their siblings, or family members or friends may come to you with concerns they have about a child's development. It's always really challenging to know how to have that difficult conversation with a parent, but even more so when the family is from a culture that's different than your own. Today's presentation will help you better understand diversity and provide strategies to help you interact more effectively with multicultural families of young children with developmental concerns or disabilities. It's now my pleasure to introduce our keynote presenter, Dixie Jordan. And Dixie is a nationally certified cultural competence trainer and a board member of the National Federation of Families. She's conducted more than 600 trainings, presentations, and keynotes nationally. She's the author of this curriculum as well as many other state and national publications. Dixie has been with Pacer for 24 years. And so I guess the best way to start, Dixie, is to say, in light of this topic, why do we need to pay attention at all?
Oh, thank you, Barb, very much. The big reason we need to pay attention is that the face of Minnesota has changed somewhat dramatically since I first moved there 40 years ago. Between the years of 2000 and 2015 in Minnesota, the population that we call non-white will grow by 35%, while the white population in Minnesota will grow by only 7%. Those from the Hispanic background throughout the Americas, as well as from Spain, that population will grow by 47%, which is fairly astounding. So by 2015, almost 20% of children under the age of 15 in Minnesota will be non-white, and 5% of the people over age 65 will be non-white. So the face of Minnesota is changing fairly dramatically. But I want to talk a little bit about culture. Many of us think we've been exposed to culture, and in fact we have. Over time, we've gone to celebrations or powwows. We've enjoyed foods from diverse cultures. But really, that's a tiny portion of what we call culture. It's the visible culture, and it's to be celebrated. Food, language, music, celebrations, and dress is really a surface level of culture, and it's one that most children and adults enjoy learning about. However, most culture really is submerged, hidden from those who haven't participated in the culture, and can only be learned through long-term exposure or direct observation over a period of time. When we greet an understood cultural rule, like if we forget to greet a guest in a way that meets their cultural needs, we really run the risk of offending that person. And it isn't important that you memorize Native Americans do one thing and Hispanics another, but really to recognize that you have a cultural preference for how to greet people. In the majority culture, that's generally a smile and a handshake. But that may not be appropriate for another group. And if that other group then sees this as rude or intrusive or a breach of etiquette, those families may simply just vanish from the landscape, and we will have lost an important opportunity.
Dixie?
Yes, ma'am.
Excuse me, I'm sorry for interrupting. We're hearing back from a lot of people that their audio is not sufficient to hear you. We just want to remind participants that they can use the toll-free number to call in and listen from their telephone if that would work better for them. Sorry to interrupt. Thank you.
That's very helpful, but I keep hearing lots of beeps on most of these.
And the beeps are participants entering the telephone room.
Okay, good. It's good to know that.
Yeah. So just try to ignore them, and we'll work out the technical difficulties. Thank you.
I will do that. The deeper we go into a culture, for those of you who have screens and can hear me, the greater of unconscious rules, which is how far do we stand for one another when we talk? What does our voice tone mean or convey to another person? What kind of verbal or nonverbal communication do we prefer? Do we like or not like eye contact? When we breach these unconscious rules, those things we can't even see, may not necessarily know about, we tend to generate a very strong negative response from people. How do we use communication? In America, we tend to be very direct and very forthright. But in a culture where direct communication is seen as rude or intrusive, how would you know that? And so we put a lot of responsibility on workers with these young families to look for signs that they're doing the right or the wrong thing in terms of how we communicate. Because it's at this level of unconscious rules, even hostility can arise if people tend to feel disrespected. Let's talk for a little bit about the importance of the perception. No person that I've met that works in early childhood education or in early childhood care, I have never met a person that wants to do the wrong thing for your family. And so how we perceive information, how we receive it and perceive it and respond to it can have profound implications for how we work effectively with people. Okay, let's go back to this for a second. What we see isn't just what we look at, but it's how we interpret what we see. So we have a set of twins on the home sheet, and both of those young people are going to grow up to see a world that is similar to them, but also very different, because how they see and understand their family, their relationships with siblings, their relationships with friends in the larger community will be different, even though the two children are in the same family. So others may not place the same meaning on what they see. Our world experiences are so different. We have to think about how our perceptions affect our relationships. So our interpretation of behavior really is filtered through our own unique cultural experiences. The truth is that what we see isn't defined by what we're looking at, but how we perceive what we're looking at, which is how we've learned through our own cultural lens to view the world. And checking those perceptions frequently with other people, finding out whether they agree or disagree, is really helpful in building the partnership relationship we all strive for. The most important feature of any culture is its communication, how it determines how it's going to communicate with others. I don't know that I can move overheads to forward, folks, so I apologize for that.
Dixie?
But it's really, yes, ma'am.
I can forward them for you. Would you prefer that?
That would be really helpful,
Okay.
because there's a lag on this end.
I will do that.
Okay. Thank you. The importance of our basic communication affects our abilities to get along with others in society. Cross-cultural communication can be thought about as a broad continuum of preferences for early childhood providers in America. The chances are that each of you out there has at least some beliefs and practices that are different from those families you serve. The key question to ask yourself is how those preferences are going to impact your relationship with others. For some people, polite conversation means a soft voice. Many families that you work with in Minnesota will see being polite and not disagreeing as an important cultural value. And so while you may lay on the table a question or a statement, you will find that many families will agree with you simply because it's the polite thing to do rather than because they actually agree. So for other people, polite conversation involves being able to speak out, to state what they want assertively, even if it means interrupting or speaking loudly or offending you. So listen and adapt your inquiry to fit the preferences of the families you're working with. Some families prefer formal over informal communication. In other words, the family member might want to be called Mrs. Smith or Mrs. Jones or Mr. Jones rather than Dad or Harry or Marie. So you need to find out from the family what their preferences are, because many of them simply will not tell you. Ask the family how they should be addressed, what their preferences are. In terms of decision-making, find out who makes those decisions about a child in the family. In America, we're really used to either talking to the mother or father of a child, and either of them seem to have equal decision-making with respect to a child. But in some cultures, those decisions are made by people either within or even outside the family. Grandparents, extended family members, people in clan relationships or travel relationships. So you need to know who's the primary decision maker for the child. Now, what's interesting about this particular overview is the concept of physical proximity. Every person I know has a concept, and it's a non-measurable concept, by the way, of their own personal space. And we get really uncomfortable when someone is in our space or when they violate our personal boundaries, even when we may not know what those boundaries are. Some people will sit very close to you or put their hand on your shoulder in collegiality when they're speaking with you, while others will stand off or step back. And those are really cultural expressions of respect. So it's important to understand what that is so that you can determine whether you're sitting too close or too far from the family you're working with. Some parents do not like other people to touch their child without reason. I remember a long time ago meeting with a mother whose young son, about 4 years old, came home from school one day to say that the teacher had touched his hair. And he had beautiful hair. The teacher, I think, just was tussling his head. And he came home and told his mother that. And the family had to go to a purification ceremony, which cost them $700 in order to restore that child, because in his family, no one except his mother and his father or his siblings were permitted to touch his hair. So please ask permission. If you must touch a child because you're intervening with them or because they're crying and you need to pick them up or for whatever reason, let the parent know the necessity of it and gain their overt permission, because touch is really necessary with young children. Explain it, and then get the parent to buy into that so that they don't feel offended if the child happens to report it. The old subject of eye contact comes up in almost every conversation when we're trying to understand the differences between people. It's typical in our culture for people to look one another directly in the eye when they're speaking. And by the way, a Native American from both Cherokee and Apache descent, and I was told as a child that it was rude to stare at someone. And in our culture, we're told that it's rude, in the larger culture, it's rude not to make eye contact when we speak to you. So it can be a very confusing topic. What I want you to remember here is your own perceptions. Once again, you may see that some parents don't look at you when you speak with them, and your perception may be that they're trying to avoid you because that's what we've been taught, or that they're just not trustworthy because that may be what we've learned over time. But in fact, that may be their particular way of showing respect. So be careful not to place judgment on things such as eye contact. Don't interpret it as disinterest or disrespect. And in some cultures, in fact, it's considered disrespectful to make sustained eye contact. Let's talk about deference, or how we get along. Deference is how we choose to greet one another in a way that's respectful. Sitting quietly with the parent, if you're having a conversation, and that parent's just sitting there, maybe they're being polite. If they disagree with what you're saying, perhaps culturally they're unable to express that. So it does not necessarily mean that someone agrees. Parents often will nod their head to let you know they're listening. It doesn't necessarily mean that they even understand what you're saying. I addressed a tribal council once, and the elders in the background all stood and nodded, and I thought, wow, this is cool. I've done something that everyone agrees with, when in fact no one agreed. But we're simply indicating that they've heard what's being said. So don't take that nod as assent. And how will you know as an individual if parents understand what it is you're trying to communicate to them? That's the important question to ask yourself. How will you know? As an early childhood professional, you are going to tread on some very tenuous ground when you notice that a child has a developmental delay or special need or appears to have something different developmentally about them that needs attention. So you may be the first person that's ever even noticed this with a child. You may also be the first person who's contacted by parents when they're concerned about their child's development. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has some helpful information and tips to help you prepare for these challenging conversations. But we've also added some cultural considerations that you should be aware of. The challenging factors are compounded for parents when they're from a different culture. New Americans may have come from countries where there were many services or support for children who had developmental issues or who had disabilities. Their primary language may not even have words to describe a delay. And so it's important that terms are used that are clearly understood by parents. Their lack of knowledge about disabilities and related services and supports that we take for granted in this country. Their lack of knowledge may mean, and often means, that their children do not access services because they don't know that they're available, or they feel stigmatized by the need for services, or they have concerns about having a premature label placed on a young child. So for parents for whom English is a second language, words used to label kinds of disabilities, even the word disability itself, may not translate to them in a way that makes any sense at all. How we treat individuals with similar labels in the family's country of origin may have been really inappropriate. Children with disabilities may never have received services in the family's home country, and so that may create some real concerns for parents over their child receiving that label in this country.
Dixie, I'm going to have to interrupt just momentarily again. We're still having some people who are not able to hear the audio from their computers, and we want to make sure that they know that they just need to call in toll-free to the telephone number, and then they will be able to hear through their phone. If they're in a group, they could put it on speakerphone. The toll-free number is 1-866-951-1151, and the conference room is 325-2262. I'll say that again. The toll-free number is 1-866-951-1151, and the conference room number is 325-2262. So hopefully that will work for you if you're experiencing difficulties. You can also call PACER directly to get some assistance if you need that at our main number. Thank you, Dixie.
Oh, thanks, Barb. Getting back to this communication concern, choosing the right place and even the right time, if you have a concern about a child's development, is going to be really important. If a parent is dropping a child off at a daycare center, that's probably not the best time to grab them and say, by the way, I think your child has a disability. Instead, you may arrange a private meeting with them, a quiet meeting with them where there will be no interruptions, so that you can share some such concerns in a place that allows them respect. Understand that emotions around hearing that a child may have a developmental issue can be extremely unpredictable. Some families may be very stoic, and others may deny, and still others may weep. And so be prepared and give the parent time and space if you have important information to share. It is absolutely critical to respect the parent's position and perspective on this. So begin with a really clear understanding of whether or not they may have concerns and what those might be. The parent may already think there's a problem and just not have the words to describe it, or there may be cultural reasons for what you perceive as a problem, such as a Native American child's language development varies sometimes greatly from what we might expect. For some families in Native cultures, talking for the sake of talking is not valued. And observation rather than speaking may have a higher value. So ask questions so that parents can begin to explain to you how their children develop and how they use language if that's a concern. Gently asking questions will allow parents to share their observations, their questions and concerns first. Then it would be more appropriate to share your observations. You may open up an opportunity for an exchange of information and even validate what a parent has feared for a long time but were afraid to put words to. Step 3, put yourself in the parent's shoes. Begin by making positive comments about their child's strengths and by reinforcing the parent's skills and love and dedication to the child. You know, this really isn't a cultural thing. It's what we do with all parents. Parents love their children. They want them to excel. They want them to be successful. So be really careful with the language you use, because some parents, even those from the larger culture, will be very offended or very frightened by information that's given if they don't feel that you have concerns for their child. Step 4 is give the parent something positive to read. You know, so just some basic information about milestones or absolute indicators, how the self-child children should develop, and the need to rule out anything more serious. So if you have something simple like a developmental checklist, give something for parents to think about when they take it home and look at it and maybe start applying it to their own child's development. You might find it helpful to use some of the resources that are referenced in the webinar resource handout, which includes the Minnesota Department of Health translated developmental wheel, the CDC's developmental milestone checklist, and PACER, parent outreach publications. These are written in simple enough language that parents, primary language is not English, will be able to grasp the concepts. So remember to do that. Be sure to refer parents to other resources for information if those resources are known to you to be effective ones. Some parents really need to figure that out on their own if their child may have a special need. And number 6, emphasize the importance of early identification and intervention. Let parents know that when children have developmental problems, the earlier we do something about it, the more likely it is that the child will develop and have a relatively normal life. So by not getting help for concerns about the children that are COVID-19, the child's problems don't go away but may become more severe over time, while earlier intervention really does set the stage for recovery. Number 7 is know that sharing your concerns is the right thing to do, even though it may be difficult for you. Try role-playing what you're going to say before you say it. Express what you've observed that gives you concern in a caring and supportive way. It may actually reduce your own anxiety and give you some confidence to have a heart-to-heart with a positive outcome for the child. So it's the right thing to do, even if it feels uncomfortable for you. And understand that when you share concerns, you may actually validate many parents' unexpressed thoughts and fears for their own child's development. Because they don't feel safe, they may be able to take that next step toward getting help for their child, and you will have had a large part of it. Step 9 is always listen to the parents and observe the child before you do or say anything. Listening is often all that's needed to help parents channel their concerns into words and into actions. And step 10, always remember that each child, no matter what culture they come from, each child is a unique individual. And please, whatever you do, don't compare the development of one child with another. There's interest in the family comparisons all the time. Billy is good at reading and Mary is good at math. And families do that. But for a person from the outside, it's best for us not to do those things. Either way, families tend to get the services if they believe their child has a need. And another step in here is don't give anecdotal information about your or other children. Instead of providing comfort and ruling out concerns, if the stories don't address the child's unique concerns, parents will dismiss them, or they might provide even more insecurity to a parent who's already experiencing some personal self-doubt. So let's leave the anecdotes out and think about the particular child in question as a unique individual. Number 11, try not to use labels, technical jargon, or unfamiliar terminology. I'm sure you've heard this before, when my son's preschool teacher said he needed special education, I thought she meant he couldn't learn and might be separated from his classmates in a separate room. Many parents do not understand mental retardation, special education, unique early intervention services. And because there's so much misunderstanding about development and disabilities, it's probably best not to mention a specific disorder. Instead, we can help parents understand their child's needs and communicate the expectations you have for the child. If a parent is encouraged to see their pediatrician, if you encourage them to go see a pediatrician about these developmental concerns, there are a couple of possible outcomes, and each of those outcomes will be positive or have positive aspects. If the parent's concerns are confirmed, they take their child to the physician. An additional evaluation can help provide the information and support the family and child needs. So please understand that while you may be the touchstone, the first point of intervention, the decisions for what to do are up to the family, and you have done the right thing by letting families know that you're concerned.
I'm going to take just a minute, Dixie, to remind people that they can type in their questions to the question box and send those in. Then they can be addressed to you or any of the multicultural advocates, and we'll be answering those later in the presentation today. And again, just a reminder that if you're having difficulty with the audio, it's not too late to call in from a phone, and it's toll-free 1-866-951-1151. Then you're going to need a conference room number, which is 325-2262. And now we're going to go back to Dixie.
Let's go a little deeper into the area of diversity. What if you were invited or went to dinner at a stranger's home? Let's say your car broke down along the roadside and a stranger you've never met invited you to come for dinner. You took the car to town, you got it fixed, and you came back for dinner. Would you know if that family liked wine with dinner? And why would that be important? Would you know whether they dressed informally or formally for meals? Why would that be important? Do you know if this family prays before eating? Why is that important? So the more we know about this family, the more likely we would be not to breach an important cultural boundary. So we learn about families. We learn about them as groups. We learn about them as individuals because we don't want to run the risk of offending them and therefore having their child be estranged from services that we believe they need. So the more we know about it, the better it is for us. That's what culture is, truly. It's about understanding why people do what they do and respecting that they can do things differently from what we may do and that that difference is also positive in their lives and the lives of their children and families. So because you're in the family for a couple of years, it helps to make a really good impression on that family from the beginning so that the idea of developing trust with professionals will carry over the child's school years and developmental years. You may set the foundation for an expectation for services that doesn't currently exist for many of our families. If you're going to meet with a family, and I know that not everyone out there meets with parents individually for long periods of time, but if you're going to meet with them, be sure to call them or visit them to answer any questions they may have about services before you get involved in it. This whole next section of today's webinar is going to deal with strategies for how to meet with families. And for those of you who are involved in formal meetings, such as IFSPs or early childhood intervention services, but in the more informal meetings, the tips really still have great relevance. This section primarily addresses issues related to in-home meetings of early intervention or ECSD case managers, but the content really applies across situations. So if you're having a meeting with a parent, explain the purpose of this meeting and its expected outcome. I remember when my daughter first had a meeting with the school that wanted to tell her about problems her son was experiencing. He's a 5-year-old and was in kindergarten. And the teacher called and said, we really need to meet with you. It's urgent. And she had no idea what the meeting was about and arrived with great trepidation and found out that there were some developmental things going on in his life that needed to be addressed, but it was by no means as frightening as the initial phone call had been to her. So be careful about that people know what's going on, who's going to be there, the roles of people that are going to be there. So prepare parents to the extent you're able to do so. Find the best days and times of day to meet, because sometimes it's just not convenient to pop in at the beginning of a daycare session or at the conclusion of the day. And so ask parents when they're able to meet. Be sure to not schedule meetings or any event of cultural or religious holidays. And please recognize that in some homes, especially Muslim homes, parents may need to take a break during the meeting because they have a prayer time that's scheduled during the day and that they really need to observe. So rather than expecting them to compromise their own cultural beliefs, it's best that we set up a time that allows them to feel successful and to be respected for their own culture. While you may want to suggest, and many of us do, the parents, the family, limit the noise from television and radio so that we can hear one another when we're speaking, you also need to consider what's realistic for a home environment. If a parent has 6 children and we're there about 1, the other 5 are watching television, it's probably really inappropriate for us to ask that the TV be turned off or that the children play outside. Sometimes we just have to make things work. You might want to say, would you like to meet on the porch? You might want to say, can we go into another room? But please understand that parents have lives outside the lives of their children related to the services we provide. It's also important to recognize the importance of community elders, spiritual leaders, or healers. I can't overstate this, and I know it's difficult for many of us in Minnesota to remember that our population has so dramatically changed. But it's not only changed in terms of growth, it's changed in terms of how diverse cultural groups use their own community support outside what we would consider normal community support. So there may be elders, spiritual leaders, or healers. And if families are involved in their own cultural community, you can remind parents that they can bring others, that they might bring someone if they choose from their own cultural background, that they might bring someone that's important to the family. But let people know this if you're going to have a formal meeting with parents. You'll want to be sure to greet each family personally and share personal information. I know that goes against the grain for some of us and for some of our training, where we're supposed to be aloof and removed from the situation. But for many families, particularly those from other cultures, they're going to want to know something about you before they tell you something about themselves. So share personal information to the extent you're comfortable, and talk to both parents unless the families express another specific preference. And expect at a formal meeting that the extended family may be present. Both relatives and relatives may show up for these meetings because, after all, it's their child. And that first meeting is so critical that you might want to do outreach into the community, find out whether there's a cultural center that serves the individual family, find out from them what are some tips or techniques that you should use to help engage that family successfully. Explain the services you provide to families very, very carefully. You're probably going to have to explain the services your agency offers. And remember that new immigrant parents will not know the systems of America or their terminologies, and neither will long-term parents who've never accessed services in early childhood years. So be sure to explain what you do and why you do it in language that people can really understand. I remember being really shocked coming home from school one day and saying to my husband, well, the IEP meeting didn't go well, and they think my son is EBD. He did not have a clue what I was speaking about. So we tend to get into shorthanded jargon that it's really important to avoid when speaking with parents, particularly those who have linguistic differences from us. So invite questions, invite disagreement, repeat more than once. I remember meeting with a group of Minnesota psychiatrists and their child psychiatrists, and their first question to me is, why do these parents have selective hearing and only hear what they want to hear? In fact, most meetings are so stressful for parents that they hear perhaps the first couple of words or the first couple of sentences and just miss the rest because they're worried about what's going to happen with their child. And so it's important to tell them you can disagree, you can ask questions. No question is a bad question, especially for immigrant parents. Help the family to understand their many, perhaps most families who come here from other cultures do not understand that families drive services. And so the concept of parents as experts in their own child's development is a concept that may take time for families to fully understand. Many families will simply hand their child off to the professional and assume that we have the expertise, skills, and knowledge to do what is right for this child without involving the family. And in fact, that's not always true. Building rapport, finding ways to agree, is going to be more important for some of the families that you work with as their own individual goals for their child. Now, that sounds strange from a majority cultural perspective, but finding a way to be agreeable with professionals can take precedence over whether the child even gets services, because getting along with a professional means that their child will be served better. And so often parents will, out of deference to you, not say anything. The idea of strength is a foreign concept to many, many families and will remain so for a number of years because they simply haven't had access to that in their prior histories. Be really sensitive to the emotional states of families as you determine the issues that you need to talk about. In Minnesota and across the nation, we have increasing behavioral concerns for many young children. And if you're going to speak to a family about their child's behavior and the child is a 2.5-year-old, be really sensitive about how that family feels about their child's behavior. Some families may teach their children to be very assertive, where others will be terribly embarrassed that their child is bringing shame to the family. It is not going to be unusual at all for a family to say, there's nothing wrong with my child. Acknowledge that viewpoint. Let them know that you see their point of view. You recognize that it might take a long time to develop enough trust in the relationship for that parent to actually hear what it is you're trying to say to them. In terms of meeting parents, if you're meeting, and it's many of you out there do go to family, if you're going to a family meeting, understand that many families show respect through offering food or refreshments to you. If you are planning to meet in a family home and are unable to accept refreshments, share that information in an informal way before the meeting comes up. You may simply say, I don't have time, or I'll come right after lunch, or bring something with you like bottled water so that the family sees that your needs are met. Meeting the needs of guests is a sign of hospitality in all cultures. And in many diverse cultures, families will expect you to sit with them and have a respectful refreshment or snack. So let them know if you can't do that. Some Russian-speaking families may offer you a gift after a first appointment or even at the end of services. Follow your professional judgment as well as your employer's policies. But whether or not you accept this gift, please remember to express great appreciation. If you have to decline it, explain that as much as you would like to accept it, your employer will to do so that they don't feel offended that you've turned down a very important offering. Be sure to ask if the family wants or needs an interpreter. The first person who connects with the family should always ask if they need or want an interpreter and translated materials. This information should then become part of the family's file, so every time you have a meeting, the interpreter will be contacted to attend. Written material in the family's primary language is really a good way to keep the agreements clear and focused. Many Russian-speaking families prefer being provided both Russian and English version of materials, as do many other cultures. So don't assume that if you are a Russian family that you don't want materials in English, because many families will like to make those comparisons, and some speak English quite well. According to a predetermined process, the information should be relayed to an appropriate person if you need an interpreter. So if a family needs an interpreter, don't assume that because one person speaks English, they should be the one who does the translation. It is best always not to use a family member, and especially not a child within the family. They will overstate or understate information that's emotional, And sometimes the material is simply not appropriate for the age of the child translating. And there may be softening of information that parents need to know. So plan and don't base it on need, because some families will say, no, I don't need an interpreter, but then ask if they want one. And please don't ask family members to translate if any other options are available to you. When you end a meeting that you've had with a family or a young child, make sure that they know what's going to happen next. When they walk away, they need to know whether you're going to call them, whether their child is to be coming back to your center or to your services repeatedly. What's going to happen as a result of the meeting? And encourage parents to let you know if they have questions or concerns. Every time you meet with a parent, please find something really, really positive to praise in terms of a child or family strength. And thank parents for participating in meetings, because it means often that they have to find someone who can watch their other children. It means often that they have to find transportation to a meeting. So going to a meeting is a great sacrifice for many families. Let them know that you respect the energy they put into it. And above all, throughout your career as a professional, encourage parents for the value of their participation. Reinforce it. Let them know that in America, parent rights are extremely valued, so highly so that they're embedded in the legal structure in our laws. Help them understand, and then talk about a structure for resolve differences. Rather than using the word rights at the beginning of a meeting, which is very frightening for some people because they think, oh my goodness, I need to find an attorney. Now, it's often more effective to help them understand how you value their role, and by reinforcing their expertise. Find out what interventions have been traditionally used with children who are like their children. Learn as much as you can about the family, and be sure the services and supports fit in the comfort zone of the family you're working with. You can later talk about rights as a structure for building agreement, because most families really do want to seek agreement with people who are working with their children. And it's a way to honor the knowledge of families as well. So reinforce their intrinsic value. Some parents, you may find, are reluctant to have their child receive services, even if they know they need them, because they're fearful of what will happen. Because of the historical overrepresentation, for instance, of African Americans in special education, African American parents of young children may be very reluctant to have their child identified as needing early intervention services if they have a delay that's not visible. So it's allow enough time in the process for families to make decisions in the way that makes sense to them, and so that they become comfortable with both you and your services. Families need to feel that they are in control. If you're going into a family's home, you need to understand that families often feel they're going to be judged. Their fear is that they're going to be judged for the appearance of their home or their dress or their parenting skills. The extra demands of having a child, as well as the size of this family, may make it especially challenging if the child has behavioral or other physical needs that require time and attention. Families may be reluctant to invite company into a situation, and you're going to need company that they feel reflects badly on their family or their parenting skills. If you find a family is hesitant to schedule a meeting in their home, offer them the option of meeting at least at first in another appropriate location and community. So let families lead on this one. If you provide home visits, meet where the parents want to meet, at least the first time, and sometimes the first several times. Many families are really wary of having strangers in their home. So the importance of the relationship between you and a family cannot be overstated, because if you're their friend, then you're welcome in their home. An additional strategy is, in many families, it's best not to initiate a handshake unless the parent first extends their hand, because they may have a belief system that affects physical contact. For instance, in many Somali Asian homes, it may be best not to initiate a handshake because they have religious beliefs that make physical contact inappropriate. Some women from Russian-speaking families may not be comfortable shaking hands at all when being introduced to either men or women. When you arrive at a meeting at home, make sure the length of the appointment is adhered to. Do your families to start and end on time. Even when families have other activities on their own, they might be reluctant to interrupt you or tell you that they need to fix dinner for the rest of the family. And so they will sit there because it's more important to be polite than it is to be assertive. So please try to stay on time with meetings. In some Asian families, you're going to find that families use both Western and Eastern medicine. In Native American families, you may find that traditional healing practices are combined with Western medicine. So there is no right or wrong way for a child's parents to behave, no right or wrong way to use specific services. So understand that even though we as a society in America believe that we can fix disabilities or mitigate disabilities or lessen their severity if a child has a delay through medical intervention, many families will have alternative practices that must be valued at least as highly as we value Western medicine. So when parents use such techniques as massage or smudging or any other healing practice that are common in their culture, consider those interventions in your service plan if you have a service plan for the family, or acknowledge the differences in a positive way and not in a negative way. Well, one of the things we know is that child-rearing practices is going to vary, sometimes dramatically across cultures. Some parents will carry their children until they're 2 or 3 years old and think that's appropriate. Some children will be allowed to play in the mud because cleanliness is important to the family. So in terms of play, is sand, mud, and water play a really valuable sensory early child experience or a messy consequence? You need to understand this because it really will bother some parents if their children come home dirty or muddy or with paint on their clothing. Find out when children begin independent toileting. For those of you who are in the early childhood sphere, especially providing services to young children in daycare settings, find out when toileting begins for that child because it might be really important for someone at 9 months or not important at 3 years. And you need to believe that parents know what's best for their individual child. What's the average age of the first step of a child for those of you working with the really young ones? Do they wear shoes when they learn to walk? Some parents won't allow their children to be barefoot because once upon a time in their home country it wasn't safe. And sometimes we have therapists in this country who say that learning to walk barefoot is the best way to begin that first step. So it's a behavior that's simply culturally determined, often determined based on environmental concerns, to find out and help parents understand it. If the fear is that the child shouldn't be barefoot in this country because it's not safe, help them understand that we don't really have a lot of parasites in living rooms and in grassy fields. Okay, let's move this one forward. There are a couple of other strategies that we're going to talk about briefly about how to impact practices that might affect you. And they are, when does a child use first words? Are you trying to teach a child to speak prematurely to the family? Is early language encouraged within a particular culture or not encouraged? How long do children sleep? Where do they sleep? Who do they sleep with? When do they stop nursing or using a bottle? When do they eat solid foods? These are all cultural determinants, and they are not our preferences to impose on others, but cultural determinants that parents have with their own children. When do children learn to feed themselves? And how independent are other children in the family? When older siblings or parents breastfeed or carry a child for a really long period of time, and we think this is excessive, you shouldn't be dressing a 3-year-old. They should be learning how to put their own feet in their trousers. Truly, a typical American expectation, but it's not disability related unless parents are concerned about it. So is not a problem behavior. Ask how parents perceive their own child's future. They may have extremely different images of their child than you carry. They may have very different beliefs about their child's success as an adult. They may have very different thoughts about the services they think would be useful So take care not to assume that they have the same image of their child as you might have. Attitudes are influenced by factors such as socioeconomic background, age, or cultural training. How parents socialize their children and meet their needs is embedded in their culture. For example, a few years back, a sample of low-income Latino mothers from Chicago indicated that they thought encouraging young children to read or write before they started school was inappropriate and would interfere with school learning. Books were considered in those families treasured possessions and kept out of the reach of young children, while we tend to buy as many books as possible for children to look at in the larger culture. Early childhood theory and training reflects a very Western perspective of child development. And I know this is a difficult concept because those of us who work with young children like the kids, like their families, and think that what they're doing, what we are doing, is effective for them. But the differences in child-rearing practices can be surprising and sometimes exasperating if we don't understand those basic differences. So we can really create a wedge between providers and parents if the family's from a non-Western immigrant culture in terms of what their expectations for their child's development is. So be careful to find out from families what they want for their child. Ask about learning differences for the young child you might have in your care who is experiencing delay. What could other children in that family do that this child can't do at the same age if the families have more than one child? And if a family had a dream that came true for their child about whom you're concerned, what would that child be doing differently? Sometimes the label of disability creates really negative expectations because the family has not been exposed to the idea of interventions that reduce its effect. They may believe if their child has a disability, it was created by some force in their life, such as retribution for past offenses. They may be afraid to talk about it. A question like a dream question, what if it came true for your child, can help parents understand that it can really help parents understand development and begin planning for the future and begin to look at, is there a discrepancy between what the child is doing and what the parent's dream sees that child is doing in a year or a year and a half or 2 years? So is there a discrepancy that can prevent that dream from coming true? And remember that open-ended questions rather than direct inquiry encourage this conversation. As a Native American parent, it took me a really long time to understand that when somebody asks you a very direct question, they really wanted to be helpful and weren't being accusatory. Because where
And exit tones are off.
doing at home, what I heard was, what are you doing wrong at home? That may not have been what was expressed, but it was what was understood. And so sometimes open-ended questions encourage the development of conversation that's not judgmental or blameful. Like, I really want to be helpful. What should I learn about the communities that will help me do a better job? Help me understand what resources you found in your community that are effective. And then when you're talking with parents, check very frequently for their understanding. Questions like, do you understand? Which is a direct question. We'll get a yes response even when we don't understand. And the parent does not understand. Instead, try something like, does this sound right to you? Or can you tell me what you think of this idea? Or do you know what to do next in terms of finding services for a child? So check often to make sure that families understand what it is you're saying. Okay.
Dixie, thank you so much. I know we've only covered a small portion of a very large topic, and so please, for additional information, be sure to reference the many related resource links that we sent out prior to the webinar, and you can also call in to a multicultural advocate for additional information. I also want to highlight the question and answer box once again and remind you that this would be a good time to send in a question. We're going to start the panel presentation next, and during that presentation, if a multicultural advocate presents and you have a question about that, email a question in and we will take those at the end as well. And hopefully the audio is working out a lot better for you, but if for any reason it's not, I'm going to give the number right now again that you can call by phone if your speaker setup is not sufficient. The toll-free number is 1-866-951-1151, conference room number 325-2262. And I also want to remind you that I know Dixie just gave you lots of information. You might have some follow-up questions for her as well. Email those in and she can address those during the Q&A. And now I would like to take the opportunity to reintroduce our team of experienced multicultural parent advocates that PACER is fortunate to have on staff here. We're going to have them give you some practical tips for successful interaction. I just want to let you know that the multicultural advocates provide individual assistance to parents in a variety of ways, including phone calls and home visits. They conduct workshops for parents and professionals. They develop and translate family-friendly materials and resources for families. And professionals can refer parents to PACER for help from an understanding parent advocate then who is familiar with their culture and can talk with them about their concerns in language they can understand. PACER multicultural advocates often serve as a bridge of sorts between school, county services, and the family. And in developing the materials and strategies for this parent outreach project, each of our advocates received input from families of young children in Minnesota regarding their personal experiences and what was helpful to them in addressing their concerns and accessing help. And before we hear from the panel, we want to first emphasize that working effectively with families from diverse cultures doesn't require you to become a cross-cultural expert. However, it does require you to be more intentional and thoughtful in your communication with parents and families who come from a culture or tradition different than your own. The more different you are culturally from the family, the more intentional you'll need to be in your communication and interaction with the family. And we've invited each of the advocates now to take a few minutes and share some tips for successful interactions based on those experiences with families that they've worked with. Be sure to email any questions you may want one or all of them to address later in the presentation. And again, it's helpful if you indicate your role or position in working with families and children. So let's begin with Hassan Samantar.
Thank you, Barb. Thank you, Dixie. Good afternoon, everybody. I think it's important to have a good relationship with all families you work with, regardless of their background or ethnicity. However, I would like to point out a few things that I believe would help professionals getting off to a good start, especially when working with the Somali families. In Somali culture, families value the relationship they have with professionals, even more so than the care or services they are receiving itself. So taking some time to get to know the family, get to know each other, and converse with the family before the meeting starts, it's a good way to start the meeting, and a good way also to have that first impression. Even when you are pressed for time, it's essential to devote some time to conversation and activities that will help build trust into the relationship. The other one that I would like to point out is when professionals use an interpreter to communicate with the family. Do not assume that just because the interpreter and the family came from the same country, they will understand each other easily. Sometimes they may have come from different parts of their countries and speak different dialects, or they may have come from politically opposing clans that socially dislike each other. So it's a good idea to have the family and the interpreters meet in advance. It could be a day before, it could be some time before the meeting as well. Also, some agencies hire freelancing or independent interpreters. As a professional, you should ask yourself or find out if your interpreter has experience or interpreting these particular materials. If not, it's a good idea to sit down with your interpreter and go over the materials you want him or her to interpret. Either way, it's a good idea to brief your interpreter beforehand. There are a lot of technical words that either do not have a meaning or do not make a sense when translating or when interpreting in Somali language. For example, a good example of this is the word disability itself. Disability is viewed as someone who's physically disabled or cognitively delayed, and it's commonly believed to be a result of a family curse, and of course it carries that stigma. It will not be unusual for the parent to initially say, there's nothing wrong with my child, acknowledge their viewpoint, and recognize it may take time to develop enough trust into the relationship for the parent to really hear and consider your input. Therapists who specialize in culturally sensitive treatment say there's a delicate balance between discussing the problems in a way that encourages those who need help to seek, or drawing unwanted attention to immigrants who already feel either stigmatized and vulnerable. Keep also in mind confidentiality is a new idea for a lot of immigrants, and nor do they believe or do they trust that what they say won't be repeated. Therefore, by briefing your interpreter in advance, it gives him or her not only the chance to bond relationship with the family, but also to find a meaningful way to translate or to rephrase differently some of your questions. For instance, an interpreter might say your child has learning difficulties. Instead of saying, your child has a learning disability, might say your child has learning difficulties, at least in initial visit. In our society, there are some things that we expect children to know, at least before the age of kindergarten. For instance, colors, shapes, sizes, how to hold a pencil, etc. Remember, in Somali culture, these are not relevant for kids to know beforehand. As a matter of fact, there are only 4 colors we have names for the Somali language: black, white, green, and red. And the fact that the school, back home had the sole responsibility of educating the children in their homeland, kids are not accepted to grow at their own. Kids are expected to grow at their own pace, so they are not expected to know all these things. One of the common phrases, as a matter of fact, you will hear from parents is always, "Why bother them? Or why subject them to do those things? They will learn at school anyway." And lastly, if you work with the early childhood agency, and if you're visiting in Muslim homes, parents may need to, just to remember this, parents may need to take a break during the home meeting to observe regularly scheduled prayer times. So ask the family, when is the most appropriate time to break the meeting? Barb, thank you very much. I will pass to you now.
Thank you, Hassan. That's such helpful, practical information. And we're going to hear next from Bonnie Jean Smith.
Hello, and thank you for attending today. Again, my name is Bonnie Jean Smith, and I am African American. To look at me, you could not know that I grew up in Europe and the United States. And I always mention this fact about myself to remind us not to make assumptions based on appearance. I have 4 children, 2 which have Asperger's, meaning they learn on the autism spectrum. I think it's important for you to remember every family has a different culture, even if they are the same ethnicity. Some families are loud, some are not. Some will attend on your every word sitting alongside you as you speak with them. Others will continue on with their day as you speak with them, expecting you to physically follow along. When working with a family from my community, it is important to share history about yourself and why you chose your profession. It is very important, if you do not understand something you have seen or heard, not to make assumptions. Simply ask for clarification. This will show parents that you are open and willing to learn about their child. Affirm what parents have been doing with their child and put those findings into context of what services you will be providing. Remember, many parents are going to be ready for you to judge them, quote unquote. When building relationships with African American families, within your entire initial contact process, stay transparent and always check for understanding, not just by asking, "Do you understand?" It is really important to repeat any initial contact information, perhaps have important information highlighted because this is new for the parents. For example, state over and over throughout your intake, this is your contact person if you have any other questions or concerns. For an example, when I was an early childhood educator and daycare center director, I made refrigerator magnets and with a place on them to write the name of their contact person. As a parent coordinator, I would welcome each family with information about myself and my family. This will not only build your relationship with the family you are currently working with, but will help your organization build capacity within the community. While assisting one family with many identified needs, I referred them to available resources. When I say available resources, I mean I do not refer families to resources I have not contacted, making sure the needed resources are actually available and current, and if possible, you can give the referred organization's intake process to the family. Because this family understood some of the processes, they were able to go through, and they gave my business telephone number to numerous other families, a trusted resource. In the African American community, when addressing an adult, out of respect, children are always taught to use the terms Mr., Mrs., Ms., or Miss. This is seen as a sign of respect, which is very important to most African Americans. Not mom or dad, unless they are your mom and dad. In the African American community, parents want to understand what you are saying and they want to be treated with respect. Thank you for your time. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thanks so much, Bonnie Jean. We're going to hear now from Jesus Villaseñor.
Thank you, Barb. Good afternoon again. Well, Dixie did a wonderful job giving you a bunch of information that is very useful. I would just like to touch on some specific tips and remind you that there's great diversity in the Latino Hispanic community. You know, we come from over 22 Spanish-speaking countries, and with different degrees of acculturation. Some, are coming just from a small farm in Mexico. Others maybe coming from California or Arizona or second generation. So please avoid assumptions based on ethnicity. And definitely, I know for a fact every family is different. Many professionals feel apprehension in working with families of other cultures because they don't think that they have the cultural expertise. But I tell you, there are chances of making more mistakes when you are an expert in your culture because we are human beings and we're all tempted to make assumptions. So as long as you use your social skills, as long as you're caring, sincere, and compassionate, the families will open to you. I tell you, once you gain the trust of a Latino family, they trust you with everything. Make sure to greet every family member and say hello and goodbye. It's not advisable to hug anyone. A handshake would do. And never forget to say goodbye when you're leaving, because that is offensive. Before having a meeting with parents, think about what you're going to say and then cut it in half. Too much information isn't good communication. Try to find a way to explain yourself in simpler terms and use examples as much as possible. Please make sure that you know the names of the parents and of the people in the meeting. Really, calling a parent a mom or a dad is not acceptable. And when you are using an interpreter, make sure to spend some time discussing what the meeting is going to be about beforehand. And be considerate to the interpreter. I remember the time when the early childhood specialist told the parents of a 2.5-year-old your daughter rocks. Now try to interpret that in a fraction of a second. So use basic language and stay away from slang. But most important of all, I guess, is um, to keep in mind the issue of confidentiality when working with Hispanic Latino families. There is the issue of immigration status. Many people are undocumented and they are very sensitive to that issue. And even though their children may be American citizens, the the parents may be fearful or not feel very comfortable. So make sure to let them know that whatever is said or discussed is confidential. And I'm looking forward to answering the questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Jesus. And last but not least, we're going to hear from Dao Shang.
Hello again, everyone. This is Dao Shang. I believe that the information this is presented is key to successful interaction with South Asian families. I want to offer tips for successful interaction with South Asian family is to build a positive working relationship with them. To do so is not just to learn about who they are and what their child needs, but also understand parents seeking services to support their child's development. For example, when among parents suspect a delay of their child's development, much of the effort is to find resources known to their family, such as verbal, traditional practice, or workshop. In the meantime, they may seek medical services with high hope that their child's condition will be cured. Imagine that the effort is not just to develop a day-to-day care for the child, but an overall plan to support the child's development. As a result, service you provide become part of this plan. In addition, some parents are reluctant to seek outside services because it shows the parents' inability to raise the child. Other parents who experience a negative working relationship with other agencies will be more cautious to use or consider other available services. It is very important to understand and support for the overall effort. Another factor for positive interaction is to understand communication style. And this is already say many things on that. But I like to add that verbal, nonverbal, and facial expression might have a different meaning. For example, smile or laughing is the reaction to a good example of shocking, exciting, or sad news. To many parents, a chain greeting is part of the normal conversation. Parents will nod as you speak, but it does not mean that they agree to what you are saying, but it's to react that they are hearing what you're saying. Emotional feelings show how a painful a situation is or a need of support. If you explain a developmental concern, you need to do in the way a parent also observes. For example, instead of saying that the child has a speech delay, tell them that you got a referral from the child's doctor, that she is 3 years old, but is not talking as much as she should. In case you meet family in the home environment and hospitality also influence interaction as well. Many parents can only provide the living room or kitchen for meeting despite ongoing distraction of the noise or child play. When relatives are present and they try to engage the conversation, don't ignore them, but encourage them to participate in the discussion because there might be persons who help or support parents with their child's ongoing needs. They may offer a bottle of water, a cup of coffee to welcome you, a meal after the meeting to show respect, to thank you, or appreciate your service effort rather than coming to say thank you very much directly. I just explained that you are due to a meeting or appointment and you cannot accept it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Dow, and thanks to all of you panelists. I want to remind people to be sure to send in your question via the question feature, and please indicate who you'd like your question to be directed to and what your role or position is in working with children. Before we close out the webinar, for those of you who are not able to stay for the question and answer, we'd like to leave you with these closing thoughts. Remember that what you and the family have in common is the well-being and development of the child. As the professional, you have the responsibility of initiating a respectful relationship with the family. However, the responsibility for sustaining the relationship is shared by you and the family of the child. Also, keep in mind that working effectively with families from diverse cultures does not require you to become a cross-cultural expert. However, it does require you to be more intentional and thoughtful in your communication with parents and families who come from a culture or tradition different than your own. Our hope is that you will find opportunities to use this information and strategies from this training in ways that work for you and lead to better outcomes for the families and children to whom you are providing services and supports. So for those of you who have to leave, we want to thank you for attending. We want to remind you to please complete the evaluation survey by August 28th, and then we'll send you your certificate of attendance. If you don't get the survey, be sure to contact us. And the question and answer session is going to follow in just a moment. I'm going to remind you that we're going to attempt to answer as many questions received as possible, but we may not be able to answer all the questions during the allotted time, and you can always feel free to contact us after the webinar. And we have some interesting questions that have come in, and we're going to also pull Dixie Jordan back into the discussion along with the multicultural advocates. And we'll start with the first question, which is really directed to any of the advocates and Dixie. The question is, how do we learn which specific cultural groups might prefer that, for instance, their child's head not be touched or avoid eye contact so we don't offend anyone? So if you're from a cultural community where this might be an issue, could you speak to that? How would you know not to touch the child's head, for instance? Dow? Dixie, do you want to comment first?
Yeah, I'll start because I was the one who brought it up. You don't know unless you ask. And most parents are certainly not going to be offended if you say to them, is it all right if I touch your child? And if the answer to that is no, or if the answer to that is no one in my family is allowed to touch my child's head except for me and my husband, then you'll know the answer to it. In terms of eye contact, your direct eye contact is not as likely to be perceived as intentional, simply because you're in a larger culture where people do make eye contact. The point I want to make is that someone's indirect eye contact must not be perceived as a sign of lack of interest or anger or stubbornness. And too often when parents look down at their hands, we assume they don't understand what we're talking about, so we make assumptions about eye contact. My only point was to be careful not to make assumptions about other people's preferences for how or when to make direct eye contact. I practiced this before a mirror, by the way, before I went to a school meeting when my son was in kindergarten, because I needed to know that I was going to be considered a partner. And so I cried at every meeting I ever went to throughout his high school career until he was too embarrassed to go with me anymore. And I cried out of frustration without having the words to say, I'm offended by what you're saying. So the only message I meant to convey was that don't make judgments about what behavior other than your own preference mean in the lives of families.
Thank you, Dixie. And I'm going to see if Dow has anything to add.
Well, I think one way to do so is to speak to someone from the community to learn more about the family. Or, there are probably many books in the library or on the website that tell about those things. And last, ask the parents, ask the family itself to see if you and they will let you do that.
Thanks, Dow. There's another question that came in that isn't really specific to culture, just about team meetings. How do you encourage other team members to attend meetings even when it asks them to stay later or come in before they want to? And I guess in many family situations, planning a meeting at a time that's convenient for both the family and the professionals can be challenging. Some of the strategies that we talk about in general for this would be talking about, is there another way that a particular team member could contribute information, either by maybe participating by phone or writing up information prior to the meeting, maybe contacting the parent individually to discuss that part of the information, and then giving it to the team to use during the team meeting. I think the most important piece is to get the input from that team member in some way or fashion, and then also be sure to complete the communication link after the meeting by sharing whatever the outcomes were from the meeting and what the family concerns and input was to the missing team member. But it is really challenging to schedule the meetings at a time that's good for everybody. The important part is finding a way to get the information and feedback both ways in the communication process. Okay, let's go on to another question. This one, too, may not be culturally specific, but we'll be able to address it from that point of view. We had a participant write, as a man working with kids with disabilities, that what's the easiest way for mom to feel comfortable with me from the start? Also, Dad, to reassure I'm just here to help and not step on anyone's feet. And I've asked both Hassan, a man, and Bonnie Jean, a woman, to field this question and get their perspective.
Thanks, Barb. I'm taking this as a Somali family, a practitioner who's working with a Somali family. As I said earlier, the relationship between the professionals and the families are very important, so much so that it's more important than even the services they get. So one of the things that I strongly would suggest if you're working with the Somali culture is to have a conversation outside of the practice. In a way, break that barrier. In Somali family, the doctor is considered to be a family friend more than a doctor, and that is a way that would help the family cross that barrier and to have that gain that confidence from both parents, not only the mother and the father. Now I'm going to pass it to Bonnie Jean.
Thank you, Hassan. And I have to agree with Hassan. In the African American community, you also need to build that feeling of being part of the family. And it's really important, once again, I'll say, to share history about yourself and why you chose your profession, and staying transparent so they understand why you're there, and you won't move or do anything without their permission, making sure that they're in the driver's seat.
Thanks, Bonnie Jean. We have another question, and I'm going to direct this one to Dow, first of all, and then Dixie, perhaps you can comment as well. We've had several questions about what is smudging and what is cupping as a healing practice, and so I'm going to ask Dow first to talk about cupping.
Cupping is a method of relieving body pressure by applying a partial vacuum by heat or suction. But I want you to be aware that the cupping method may not use for very young children because there's a strong pressure there, so you might not not see that. But for older children who understand the cupping, who can stand on the pressure, family might likely use it.
Thanks, Dow. And Dixie, before you address what smudging is, there's a related question. When Dixie said to consider a parent's interventions in the plan, does she suggest writing it in the plan, like quote unquote, parents are going to be using cupping in the home as well as therapist recommendations? So if you could tell us what smudging is and then how you would address these interventions as part of the plan.
Those are great questions. And I want to go back to cupping for a minute because cupping was really important in Southeast Asian culture. And during the immigration of various Southeast Asian groups, Hmong, Cambodian, Laos, many families were referred to Child Protective Services because of marks left on the child's body, and that's why it became such an important issue for people to learn about. Smudging is used in traditional Native cultures, but it's also used by other cultures. It's one would light a sacred, and in my culture it was a cedar, but in most Native cultures, and especially in Minnesota, it's sweetgrass or sage, and smudging is like smoking the body. This is a healing practice that was used in some hospitals and was forbidden for a period of time because people were concerned about setting the fire. It was a very important healing ritual and remains in many Native cultures. If a family says that they're using any traditional practice and that is the practice that they choose, yeah, I would put it in the plan because that validates the importance of what a family is doing for a child. We cannot say with any certainty that we can cure the majority of disabilities. What we can say is there are treatment options available. And so one of those treatment options would always be traditional healing. And I think it's very respectful to say that the parents will continue with or will utilize. Sometimes it may be a shaman. It may be a particular healing ceremony you're not familiar with. And Southwest Native American tribes, it might be sage drawing. So there are lots of different ways that people have to heal themselves and their families. And those practices are considered equal to Western medicine. And often are used in combination with Western medicine. And I think it gives great deference to the families, not only their rights, but to their beliefs about what works for their child, to incorporate that in writing in a plan.
Great.
A plan of action for the parent. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, the next question that came in, we're going to direct to Hassan. It's when I'm speaking to a group of parents, the family members talk to each other and don't listen while I'm giving the teacher information. How can I get them to stop talking and listen?
Interesting question, and I hear this from the professionals quite often. Normally, and what I found out, my experience is normally when you see the parents is talking to each other and not listening, what that means is they're not really cued into the conversation. They're not really either quite sure what's going on or what's being said, and that talking that you see, it's among them asking each other, what did she say, what is going on? And so I would find a way to get them involved with the activity, get them involved with the conversation. If I have an interpreter, again, I would have that interpreter tell them piece by piece what's really going on. And I normally see this in a major gathering or the school events. But normally that's what's happening when the parents are not really paying attention and talking. That means either they having a tough time keeping up with, or they don't know actually what's going on.
Thank you, Hassan. This next question is actually, I'm going to address it to Dao, Hassan, and Jesus. The question is it offensive or supportive to try to speak in the family's native language when I know a little, but I'm still using an interpreter? So what are the pros and cons of using a little bit of the native language if the professional is able to?
In Somali culture, this is Hassan. Actually, it's a very, very positive. I strongly urge and I strongly suggest it's a positive way to show the family, and it pleases them and it makes them. It shows them that the professional is making the effort. So yes, it's a positive for in Somali culture.
This is Jesus, and in the Latino Hispanic community, it is a positive, it's an effort that is looked with, as graceful, but you have to be careful to allow the interpreter also do his or her job, because in the end, it's very easy to have misunderstandings. So you need to be as clear as possible. So, a short, a greeting or a small talk in the beginning, just for conversation, but then let the interpreter do his or her job.
This is Dao. I very much agree with Hassan and Jesus. It is a positive special greeting. I have seen many families, they are very happy to see a professional coming to the home, have a meeting, and to say hello to them, how's your child, and then to say goodbye in the language, even though not as good as it is, but it's very helpful that you put a great effort to help them out. So that's good.
We had a comment that I just wanted to share, and feel free to send your comments as well. This commenter said, I think word choice is crucial. I learned the hard way while I was in the Ukraine that sarcasm and jokes don't always translate. Thank you for mentioning that. And that is a very good point. I think Jesus mentioned in his presentation, but humor is tricky when you're speaking the same language, but when you have the language barrier, it can be very hard to interpret. So thanks for that comment. And along with it, someone asked, do you have any hints working with Russian families? And we have just been working with a Russian consultant to do some development of additional materials for Russian outreach. And we're working on that right now, but we do have some information. And if you're interested, you can contact me, Barb Zimke, at Pacer, bzimke@pacer.org, and I would be glad to share with you some of those tips. And we will eventually have a written format that we can share that with as well. And that we appreciate the question. Then I have a question for Jesus. And here it is. What's more appropriate to use, Latino or Hispanic, when you're using terminology? Is there a major difference between the two, and one that makes family identify with the term more than another, one more than another?
The term Latino or Hispanic actually was invented in the United States. So when I came to this country, it's the first time I heard those. I have heard them before, but not as my, a way of identifying myself. Me, I would prefer to be called by my first name, or even, if it comes out of ethnicity, I would like to acknowledge that I'm Mexican more than Latino or Hispanic. Now, the Latino and the Hispanic part, as I understand, was made up with the Reagan administration in a way to categorize or for surveys purposes. And the term Hispanic was, as I understand, used as a way of acknowledging the Spanish language or the Spanish-speaking people. But using that then would leave the people from Brazil out, because even though they are Latinos, they don't speak Spanish. They speak Portuguese. So they had to add Hispanic slash Latino. Now, there may be some political things going behind that. I'm not sure. But if you want to be on the safe side, like me, I try to be always inclusive and use both. But that's not usually something that I refer to the families that I work with specifically. So, but if you want to know more, then you can ask a specific family, how would they like to be identified? I mean, to be mentioned as Latino or Hispanic again. They may not like either, Most of us would just like to be addressed by our names. Thank you.
Thank you, Jesus. A question came in for Bonnie Jean. I have had African American families become offended when cultural differences have been asked about or referenced. How do we go about acknowledging differences without offending? I think that's kind of the key question in every culture.
You're right, Barb. And you've done your job when you've asked the question. You just need to take a clue from the family and accept the family does not see it as an issue and leave it at that.
Thanks, Bonnie Jean. A question for any of you is from an early childhood special education teacher who asks, what would you suggest a teacher to do when a parent says that they don't want or need an interpreter? However, the teaching staff feels like an interpreter would be helpful. We think the family is not understanding as much as they could be if they were hearing the information in their native language. So the question is, what should the teacher do?
Oh, Barb, this is Dixie.
It may be a school policy. It can be reasoned that even though the family may not need an interpreter, the teacher might. And, sometimes the families want to bring their own interpreter or a relative, and they should have that option. But in the end, the school also has the right to have their own interpreter there, especially when our issues about due process matter. So that's the school will always have the right to have their own interpreter.
And Hassan also has a comment.
Thanks, Barb. The point that I would like to add is, again, as I mentioned earlier, in Somali communities, sometimes there's still civil war going on in the country, and there's a political factions. And parents, for two reasons, sometimes they avoid having an interpreter. Well, one is, number one, the stigma that I mentioned before the disability has, the stigma that it carries, and they do not want people that they perceive as being not socially acceptable to their own clan or to their political affiliation. But one of the, if you run out of any other option, I'd really suggest that you would ask the family to have one of their, bring their own interpreter, someone that they feel comfortable with. But that would be, of course, the last resort.
And this is a related question, Dow, specific to Vietnamese culture. Is it seen as a weakness to need an interpreter?
I need to find out more information about the answer. I like to tell you that I'm from one community, so sometime I will be able to speak on behalf of the Vietnamese community, but we will provide answer in writing to you. Thank you.
So if that individual wants to email directly, then you can email Barb at Pacer, bzimke@pacer.org. I will forward that question to Dow, and he will try to respond to you. So thank you for the question. There's also kind of a general question that came in. What happens when you have done all that you think you can do to encourage parents to seek extra services to help their child and they do not want the services? And from a non-cultural kind of perspective, I'll answer that and see if anyone else has the contribution they want to make there. But You know, by offering services and working with the family have really done your part. Families need to be the one to make the final decision about their young children and the timing of services and how it works for their family and their lives. And as all of us as advocates here are also parents of children with disability, and so we speak as parents as well, and really believe that parents are the experts on their kids. And as professional, it may be difficult to let parents make that final judgment call, but that is appropriate. And as long as you contributed the information that families can base good decision making on, you really have done what you need to do. Jesus also has a comment.
Yes, I just wanted to go back a little bit to the interpretation issue. And there are times, for instance, when the husband's English may be, he may be proficient, but not the wife. And many times the husband would say, no, we don't need an interpreter. But the school, again, if they feel that it's important that the wife understands what is happening in the meeting, they can say, well, for the benefit of your wife, we're going to use the services of the school interpreter.
This is Tao. Another way to think about is that the service that you offer might be very new to many families, and they don't foresee that before. So family might take time to consider and may say later. So why not say to the family that this is available and provide good information, and they will have some information in hand. They can ask for their service later.
Thank you, Dow. There's a question that came in for Hassan. A Somali family I work with gave me a scarf as a gift, and I think someone earlier, referenced that you may get gifts. Do you think they would expect me to wear the scarf each week when they come?
Good question. No, they're not. At least it would be nice and respectful to wear once, so at least that they see that you appreciate. But what it really means, it's a gesture that they would really like to have you as a family friend. Again, as I said, that a friendship is it's more important to them than the professionalism. So that's exactly the gesture. It's more important than wearing it every day or every time you see the family.
Thank you, Hassan. Then there's a question, and this can be to any of you. The question is, how do women as professionals gain the trust of men who are traditionally more dominant and decision makers in their cultures? Dow.
This is a very good question, and this is Dow. I have the kind of experience when I went to an IP meeting. It seemed like everybody asked me if my wife would join the IP later, and I say, no, I'm here, and you have to speak directly to whoever is here. So I think acknowledge the man and encouraging to participate, even though some family might make a decision, but if the wife actually attend the meeting and wife say I had to think about it, that means only time to talk to her husband, and they will make decision and let you know later. I think let the husband be part of those conversation or part of planning.
Thank you, Dow. Was there anyone else who wanted to comment on that question? Then Jesus would like to add a comment in regards to the interpreter questions. We received several questions about that topic.
Thank you, Barb. Yes, and I think that besides culture, definitely communication is the biggest barrier that we need to overcome with working with families. So I just wanted to also acknowledge that there are circumstances where families wouldn't want to have an interpreter because they, again, we go back specifically with the Latino community to the issue of confidentiality or the issue of immigration status, or it's not unheard of that in a small town in greater Minnesota where the interpreter knows everybody in town, and sometimes there has been experience that she may not be as professional, she or he has not been a professional and have divulged information about a family. Well, they are very sensitive to that issue. So we need to take that into consideration when they are reluctant to accept the services of an interpreter, and just assure and give information and assure the families that confidentiality will always be respected.
Thank you, Jesus. We're going to go back to the question about women as professionals gaining the trust of men from cultures where they're traditionally more dominant in decision-making. Hassan has a comment.
One other point that I would like to make is a woman as a professional. You should. It might be to newcomer. It might be a culture shock at the beginning for a professional woman to be in this position. But as a professional, I think you should just ignore it and go about it your business. It will eventually wear off, and I think it'll become something that is acceptable to the family and normal. But yes, it does happen, and I acknowledge that.
Thank you. Here's a question that all of you can think about, all the advocates. Do these cultures respect men and women equally as teachers? That's related to the discussion we've been having. So in your culture, are men and women as teachers treated equally? So I'll start with Jesus.
Yes, and it has been one of the, it's very necessary to explain families, though, that the educational system is different. Not just they are equally respected, but teachers are highly, highly respected to the point of, the teachers are the ones that call the shots and makes any decision that has to do with the educational curriculum and anything that has to do with school. And parents acknowledge that, that respect, and that's why many times American teachers here in schools wonder why there's no more participation of the parents in, as far as involvement, and that's because in the countries that we're coming from, always teachers know best.
Well, that's kind of a broad question, but I wanted to add a little bit in the Somali view. It all depends on where that family is originally from. Many Somalis that you see in Minnesota are from a very rural area of the country, and they have not been exposed to in a city structure or a city life, or have never been attended an educational system. And in a rural area, of course, you don't find a women teachers, and that's where where it comes from, and they always accustomed to see men teachers, male teachers, and that's where the disconnect comes from. But typically in the cities, women and men are both teachers and are highly regarded, as Jesus mentioned.
Thank you, Hassan. We were able to answer almost all of the questions. If your question was unanswered and it's a burning question for you, please feel free to email. And we want to, once again, thank everyone for attending, but also I want to thank all of our presenters today. And as we shared earlier, our hope is that you will find opportunities to use the information and strategies from this training in ways that work for you and lead to better outcomes for the families to whom you're providing early intervention and early childhood special education services and other early childhood services. We want to thank you for all you do on behalf of young children and their families. Goodbye.